Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 9. And for Lecture 9, we will introduce a new method. It's called the diff method. And then another one is called the panel data. In fact, panel data is one special structures of data. And for the panel data, we often use panel data to, we often apply the diff approach on the panel data. It's the most general forms of a diff. And also, there is one particular estimation method other than the simple OIS estimate we have introduced. That's called the fixed effect model. And we will also introduce that in today's lecture. So about diff. Diff itself is a method we use in econometrics to analyze policy changes. Initially, this method is actually developed from experiment settings, because it also requires that we have a treatment group and a control group. Which the treatment groups will be the groups that receive the policy changes, and the control groups do not receive this policy treatment. But remember, in the experiments, when we introduced the experiment method, we said one of the weaknesses of using experiment is that we have to ensure we're using experiments to tell the effects of a treatment. We have to ensure the pre-treatment difference between the treatment groups and control groups not exist. There's no virtually difference between the treatment group and the control group before the treatment. But, and in the case that there is indeed pre-treatment difference between the treatment and control group, then we will have our omitted variable bias, or we can also call it the selection bias, remember. And it can be called as omitted variable bias in the sense that we actually omit the variables that based on the factors based on which the individual actually saw or subject actually saw into this treatments and control group. So we can also call it, when we have this pre-treatment difference, we can also call it these two groups are not balanced. This is a terminology that we will use. It's similar as actually X anti. But no, it's actually different X anti, but not X pole. Okay, but sorry, a different X anti, and therefore it may also difference X pole. And in the experiment part, we actually talk about there's one way that we can solve this pre-treatment difference. You can solve this selection bias. And do we remember what's the method? Yes, the method is to do randomization. If we randomly draw those, we randomly saw those individuals or subjects into the treatment groups and control group, these problems can be, this pre-treatment difference can be naturally right away. But there is another way. And we also talk about the limitation of experiment, remember, because experiment, you have to randomize on the selection for those who you apply the treatment. So normally it's very hard when you're doing public policy, because it involves some, whether it's suggestive, whether this procedure is suggestive, but this type of controversy, and also it can be very costly. So we introduce another method. It's you can see it as an advanced models of advanced approach of applying this applying this experiment-like approach is called a diff in diff, is we actually take into consideration the before, the pre-treatment's difference and the post-treatment difference between the treatments and control group, trying to eliminate the pre-treatment difference between these two groups using this data, both pre-treatments and post-treatment. So let me illustrate using an example. So in the 1920s, if you know a little things about the world's economic history, in the 1920s, actually we have a very huge economic recession that we call, it has its unique name called the Great Depression, kind of like today, maybe most likely worse than today, and in the economic sense, not in the public life sense. And so in the 20s, when we face this Great Depression, well, there is a bank in the northern side of the U.S. It's called the Crowells and Company. Actually, this bank actually based in a county called Nash Valley in the Tennessee state, and it actually was the largest banking chain in the South at that time. So their slogan is this one, that we bank on the South, okay? But in the November 1930s, this Crowell's bank can't afford us due to the combination of a set of adverse factors, including the corruption of the high executive, mismanagement, and also the natural disaster like drought, because at that time the U.S. economy, the majority part, it's agriculture still make, and majority parts of the country's economy. So the bank actually exposed itself a lot to the agricultural loan. So drought will naturally hit that. And also, of course, the economic slump of the Great Depression also directly impacts on the bank. So as a response, the bank actually participate a bank run in Mississippi's in December 1930, following a slow drought, slow drain, because they refused to have a bank run. So slowly, you know, but if you are the user, if you are the customer of the bank, if you are the depositor of the bank, you know the bank was facing this crisis. So slowly they actually withdraw the money from the bank. So the bank actually faced this slow draw of deposits at first. And then at the December 1920, after a few weeks, five banks among its chain kind of closed because they can no longer afford these withdrawals of money. And then it actually triggers a banking panics, start with 29 bank foldings during the next 6 months. Okay, this is the events of bank run in the 1930s in the Great Depression. So this is why I mentioned these events, because later on we will use these events. We will actually use data from these events to answer a very important economic question in the macroeconomy. That is, how should the central bank react to a banking panics? That's a very important economic question, or macroeconomic questions, or the policy questions to central bank. Like in the 2009 financial crisis, obviously the U.S. the central bank, the Federal Reserve, act very quickly. And although their measure kind of have been criticized from many different perspectives later on, but nobody doubt their very quick response, their quick resolution engagings in the banking crisis at 2008 is actually contributes a lot to the quick recovery of the U.S., at least to the U.S. Markets in 2008. And if I think most economists agrees, if without such a quick response of the Federal Reserve, it's very likely that we will be facing a long-term economic depressions, just like the Great Depression. Okay. Although the way they're doing with this, the 2008 crisis is obviously they throw in a lot of money, respond actively. There's a famous saying by Bernanke that's helicopter money. It's like throwing monies away with a helicopter. Although the measure itself has a long-term consequence, but still, it deems by many as a necessary move. But still, academically speaking, there is two conflicting views about how the central bank should behave when facing a banking crisis. One school think that the central bank should act actively as a lender of last resort to the banks in crisis. They should provide money immediately to the banks in crisis so as to avoid bank runs and also the consequent collapse of the financial market. Because the withdrawals during trust, normally a financial crisis is also a crisis of confidence of investor. So whenever you face a financial crisis, the investor, so as to avoid loss, they will kind of try to withdraw money. But the withdrawal drains the cash access from the bank because nobody wants to be the last one to get their monies out. So a bank run frees on itself in this sense because it's a freeze on people's emotional, irrational, how to say, emotional and irrational urge to kind of avoid this loss. So, but in order to continue operating, the banks will have to liquidate their liabilities, withdrawing credits from the economy and other banks. So this is how from a conflict normally happens in the financial crisis. That is the loss of confidence of investors first, and after they withdraw the money from bank, and then bank also withdraw money from the economy. Because they need monies to survive. They need liquidity to survive. But that also causes another problem is those firms that actually operates on loan, they growth on loan, kind of lack of money, lack of liquidities at this time. This actually create a vicious circles in short, where one bank's trouble kind of can spill over to the other banks and also to the real economies, to the whole economy system. And because of that, to stop this vicious circle, some people think, some scholars actually think that the central bank should act actively to kind of lend monies to the bank, kind of pro liquidities to the economies, and make sure there is no this type of vicious circle kind of suffocating the activities of the real economy. the central banks can do that because basically central banks to any economies, they have these powers of you have the sovereignty's support, you have the sovereignty's credit, so you can kind of make monies out of nowhere after the breakout of the Bretton's Woods system. The central banks no longer need to no longer need to credit their monies based on the actual assets. So basically, if just the central bank want, they can print any money. They can print as many money as they want. So that's also ensure they actually have the powers to as a last resource. But there is another school of view that kind of object this active role of central bank in the financial crisis. They think the central bank should do nothing or even withdraw credits from bank. Why is that? The reason is that they think, well, there is many. Sometimes you have financial crisis, and also we know that economy never grows smoothly. That we have this term called economic circle. That means that economies often go up and down. It's a kind of growth in the circle. So who can actually say a crisis is just a liquidity crisis? For example, during the Great Depression, the real economies was doing poorly, and many bank loans may therefore have gone bad because they actually invest in a bad firm, bad companies in the real economy. So if you're injecting more liquidity into the bank, it simple amounts to throwing good money after bad. They will kind of they will keep pulling this money to those bad investment, to those inefficient investment, to those bad firm. It also observes banks managers from potentially poor decision they make in the past. Because if they make a wrong decision in the past, and then the will invest in the bad firm, and then the firm kind of have some financial crisis, and then the bank lack of money. And if you lend the banks money, then we have this so-called moral hazard issue. The bank no longer have to pay for their bad decision. So if they know that you don't need to make, it costs you nothing to make a bad decision, you will keep on making bad decision. And this is what also in the 2008, one of the bad consequences many people believe of the helicopter monies by the Federal Reserve is that it actually enlarged this moral hazard problems of the banking system. So when you encourage the bank to make poor decision, it possibly encourage more prodigious behaviors in the future. So that's a bad thing. And if you see the financial crisis, if you see the economic recession as a process that we actually let go the bad and keep the good, then maybe not pooling money, not serve as a lender of last resort is good. You just let the markets follow the route of the nature, right? The roots of evolutions. Those good, those strong stay, and the weak and the bad actually kind of drip away with the crisis. So actually, if you listen to the reasons of these two type of view, they kind of make sense. They each of have their very strong reason, and the reason sounds make sense. So how can we decide which one is actually a better decision? If you are the chairman of the Federal Reserve, what should you decide facing a banking crisis? should you lend money to the bank, or should you do nothing and withdraw, even withdraws money from the bank? So in fact, this can be a logical argument. This is a demonstration how we make logical arguments. For questions, we raise arguments, and we raise and we reason using logics. But it can also be an empirical question. We can answer that just by data, right? So exactly who's right? Actually, the Mississippi's banking crisis in the 1930s, I introduced at the beginning of the course, provides a very good experiments to answer this question. Let me introduce a bit more about the setting of these experiments. At the time, the U.S. Federal Reserve System, literally the central banks of the U.S., is actually organized into 12 districts. So they separate the whole U.S. state into these 12 districts. So each of the districts actually gathers the banking issue under their jurisdiction. So they're operating with a lot of autonomies during the periods of Great Depression in the 1930s. And Atlanta Fed actually runnings the 6th district, favors lendings to troubled bank. So within 4 weeks of the Crowell's collapse, the Atlantic's Fed actually increased bank loans by about 40%. Why another districts, another subdivisions Federal Reserve, the St. Louis Fed actually runnings the 8th districts, behave according to the Will-Bill's Dartrix. That's the Dartrix held by the kind of consistent with the second will, maintaining central banks should not do anything, even they should withdraw money from the banking system in the crisis, mandating that the central bank should restrict credits in the recession. So, for under the St. Louis Fed jurisdictions, the bank lending, meaning the lending from the Federal Reserve to the bank, actually fell almost 10% during this 1930s Southern U.S. Banking crisis. And another important thing for this setting is that the border between the 6th and the 8th districts for the Federal Reserve System actually runs matched through the middle of the state of Mississippi. Meanings, because the banking crisis, it actually happens in the Mississippi district areas, right? So, but part of the bank in this Mississippi area facing this banking crisis, they belong to the jurisdictions of the 6th district, okay? And some other bank actually belongs to the 8th district. So you can see, because the 6 districts are those central banks maintaining that you should lend money, and the 8 districts is those you shouldn't lend money, you even should withdraw money. So to compare the bank under crisis in Mississippi under either the 6th or the 8th district. So you can if your question is whether lending money actually lead to a better result, then the treatment will be the Federal Reserve lend money, the central bank lend money to bank. So you can use those bank under the 6 districts as the treatment group, and then the other under the St. Louis 8th district as the control groups, right? It's kind of like an experiment, very nice experiment setting. So this is a distribution if we draw it visually. So this is the border. This is the borders of the 6 and 8 districts for the this whole area is the Mississippi state, and then this bold line actually draw the line between the areas belong under the jurisdiction of the 6th district of the Atlantic Fed, and then above the line is those districts that belong to the 8 districts belong to the St. Louis Fed. Okay, so those dog actually is the bank. And also the size of the dog actually represents how many banks actually suspend during the crisis. And you can see there are actually more larger dogs in this area under the District A, probably because the St. Louis Fed refused to lend money to this bank. Okay. So, and well, one Mississippi, two Mississippi is actually a very famous song, children's songs in the US. So this is a very interesting setting that we can do this experiment. So in the 1930s, July 1st, 1930, that's just before the banking crisis in Mississippi, the numbers of banks open in both districts is this. This is a number. In the 8th districts under St. Louis, that's 165. And the 6th districts under Atlanta is 135. And the difference is 30, minus 30. And then after the crisis, 1 year later, after at the July 1st of 1931, post the crisis, the number of banks in the 8th district is 132, and the number of banks in the 6th district is 121. You can see after 1 year, 1 year after the crisis, after this area induced the crisis, the numbers of banks actually significant drop, right? For the 8th district, a significant decrease. 33 banks actually went bankrupt. But in the 6th district is 40 banks actually go bankrupt. Can we directly compare this 33 and minus 40s to conclude that you should actually lend money to the bank? Because 6 districts are those districts under lenders, they decide to lend money. And it seems like they did help. They did help the economies. They did help the banking system because less banks actually go bankruptcies in the 6th district. But can we just compare this minus 33 and minus 40s to draw the conclusion? If we compare these two numbers, we should conclude that the 6th district, let's put it in a way. So this is why we need these minus 33s and minus 40s numbers. If in the experiment setting, we will just calculate the numbers post the treatments, right? So we will just look at the numbers after the bank crisis at the 1st July 1931. That is for the 8th district's 132 bank, and the 6th district is 121. And the difference is actually minus 11, okay? So is this minus 11 actually, let me rephrase the question, is this minus 11 actually reflects the effects of, treatment, meaning that the central banks actually lending monies to the banks in crisis? No, because we said, again, this is not a perfect experiment. We didn't do randomization before the crisis. So there is some pre-treatment difference between the two districts. If you look at the numbers in 1930s, they already have a lot of difference in terms of how to say, in terms of numbers of bank that they have pre-treatment. So, and the gap is actually larger even before the crisis. Before the crisis, the gap is -30s, and after the crisis, the gap actually shrank a lot. But because it's in the control groups that originally they have more bank. So if we take the difference between these two, the -30s and -11, then we will have, if we will have -19s, right? That's the actual effects of the, if we use this, this is post-treatment, right? We should use the post-treatment to minus the pre-treatment difference. And if we use the post-treatment difference minus the pre-treatment difference, we will have 19 positive number. That's the actual effects of the treatment. You're lending monies to the banks. So this is why we call this a different in difference approach. The same if you use this -40s to -33, actually you will also have the numbers of 19s. You will have the same number if you use the difference of the marginal difference between of the row or the marginal difference of the column. Both will give you the same number. That's a 19. That's the actual effects of this treatment. Okay. So the actual effect is not -11. It's actually 19. Okay. Because you have to minus those pre-treatment difference between the two districts. This is why we call the method different. You can see you take the first difference, pre-treatment between the two groups, the treatment and control group, and then you take the difference between the treatment and control group post-treatment, and then you take the difference between these two differences. Okay, that is why we call it different in difference. By doing this different in different, you can see we actually subtract the part of pre-treatment difference between the treatment and control group from the outcome. This is how we actually kind of how we actually dealing with the pre-treatment difference in a non-random experiment setting. Okay, let me ask you a question, your turn. So actually 40 banks closed in the 6 districts between 1930s and 1931. Can we just use this change over time as an estimate of the effects of policy by the Atlantic Fed? That's this one. Meaning that we only look at the treatment group. Is that okay? So A, no, because the 6 districts have fewer banks open in the 1930s than did the 8 districts. B, no, many banks closed during depression era panics, and the best policy may not have been able to prevent this. So this may just react. Oh, sorry, this is typo, should be react. This may just react the effects. Oh, sorry, this is, oh, no, not reacts. This, the typo, this word should be reflect. Reflect the efforts of a bad period, okay? Okay. And the last one, yes, using a change between 1930 and 1931 would be a useful estimate. Okay, what's the answer? You can choose more than one. I give you 5 seconds maybe. Okay, so the answer should be B, right? So first, we cannot just use the treatment groups for the comparison. This is not an option. Why is that? Let me explain. The first option, the 64 banks, but this is bullshit. Logically, it doesn't. This statement doesn't logically lead to the conclusion that we can use just the treatments as to kind of estimate the effects of treatment using only the treatment group. B is actually the right answer. Why we cannot just use the treatment group? Think about that. During the crisis, this district, for example, for this district 6, the banking system in district 6, it actually undergoes two types of effects. The first effect is common to the whole South, to the whole Mississippi. That is, you encounter this economic crisis, you encounter this banking crisis. So one effect is actually coming from the treatment group actually have is the banking crisis effects. And then because the 60 districts under the Atlantic Fed, they receive the reserve money by the Federal Reserve. So you also have this Federal Reserve effect, central banks effect. So the outcome, the -14, is actually the outcome by combining these two effects, by combining both the effects of banking crisis and Federal Reserve, the central bank's action. Okay, but what you really want to tell, what you really want to estimate, is only the second part. It's the effects of from the central bank's policy. Okay, so you have to kind of eliminate the effects of you have to eliminate the effects of financial of this banking crisis from this outcome to get the true effects of the central bank's action. Okay, how to do that? Think about that, because the first effect, the effects of banking crisis, is actually uniform to both the 6 and 8 districts. It's uniform to the Mississippi state. So for the 8th district, you can consider, because they have this doctrine, the St. Louis Federal Reserve, you can consider them as they did nothing to help the bank. So the outcome for the 8th district is actually the outcomes of the banking crisis itself. Okay, so if you minus these effects from the -40, you can actually, because again, the -40 reflect the effects of banking crisis plus the central bank's action, and then the -30s, -33 represent the effects of banking crisis alone. If you minus these two and take the gap, that will be the net effects of the central bank's action. That is why we cannot rely the estimate. We cannot estimate the effects of the central bank's action by looking at the treatment groups itself. Okay, we can also represent it in this very really simple graph, very nice graph. Let me connect, give me a few seconds. Let me connect my iPad so that I can take